Hello, hello. All right. Thank you everyone for tuning in. We're going to do a bit of a podcast today. I've got my longtime friend Shawn on the line, and we're going to talk about the importance of album sequencing. Shawn, thanks so much for joining me.
Dude, it is my absolute pleasure and honor to be here. Thank you so much for asking me to do this. I have been wanting to come on the show for a long time, and I am kind of grateful that we have kind of a low stakes, fluffy topic to talk about because you tackle some really serious stuff on this show, and we've talked about me coming on before, and I'm like, I'm not qualified for this or that topic, so I'm glad we found one that we could kind of agree on and just BS about albums we like.
Hey man, don't put yourself down, you know? The album sequencing is an interesting thing to talk about, and this kind of format where it's less of a, we're not having a debate, we're just kind of like shooting the shit. I'm totally down for that.
Awesome.
All right, cool. Well, we've got a bit of an outline that I guess I can share at the end, but we can just talk through this, have some back and forth. I guess we can get things started. Let's see. So we're talking about album sequencing. I guess I actually had a question for you when we were discussing this. You kind of stipulated that there's two different things. There's like flow, album flow, and album sequencing. What are those two things to you?
Sure. So to me, the flow of an album means the emotional flow, the highs and lows, the crescendos and decrescendos, whereas sequencing literally just means this song comes first, this song comes second, et cetera, et cetera. So to me, it's two different things, but in general, I think we can discuss them, at a high level as meaning somewhat the same thing, but we'll get into closer details of what the difference is.
That is interesting. It's hard to, I agree that you're talking about two different things, but they're almost, you can't change one without changing the other, right? Or they're like intertwined in a way that I can't really separate in my mind.
It could be, but I mean, you could think about it this way. You could have an album that has a really great opener, but it could have a song on track 7 that would also make a really good opener. So the sequence could be different, but the flow would stay the same.
Oh, I see what you're saying. That's a good example.
Yeah.
It's a good example. So how important to you is an album's flow or sequence or both?
I have thought about this a lot leading up to this conversation. And one of the questions that I tried to put in my mind is what makes an album have a particularly good flow or sequence versus it just being a really great album that I love, right? So there's a lot of what I would call 10 out of 10 perfect albums or great albums or whatever, where it's just a band or a group going at the same energy for the whole album. Like the first Suicide Machines album is an album I really love. They're a band that were like a ska punk band. Well, every album they make has kind of a different flavor, but their first album was ska punk. And I think it's a masterpiece, but it's the same kind of music through the whole album. I wouldn't say there's a particular importance to the sequence or flow or track listing or whatever. But then you listen to something like Dark Side of the Moon, and you can't play that album on shuffle. That's very important. Like the songs segue into each other. There's a theme. There's an emotional journey, for lack of a better term, that the album takes you on. So it's kind of a case by case thing. And I don't, until we started researching for this conversation, it wasn't something that I thought about a lot.
Really?
There are examples of albums that have they're just one long piece, and I can't think of any besides Dark Side. Dark Side of the Moon is my ultimate example, and that string of Pink Floyd albums like Wish You Were Here I'd put in that category as well.
Okay, yeah.
Animals as well, exactly. That you wouldn't sorry, I gotta clear my throat, bro. Hold on. And I don't have a mute button, so apologize for that. So just in general, it's not something I think about when I think of great albums.
That's interesting. You're right. It's like a case by case basis. Um, Albums where kind of it's like maintaining the same energy the whole time are great. If they do it well, it can kind of be like a whole experience that you're just kind of like in this musical world for 30 or 40 minutes being pummeled by whatever kind of music. But if there's kind of more of a like, I don't necessarily view Dark Side of the Moon as a concept album, but I definitely see that there is like you said, like a journey that like the listener is being taken on. There's definitely like, to me, there's like a sequence and a flow that like that are intertwined that like you can't take away from that album. It definitely adds to like the enjoyment of that album. I guess it depends on how the artist like composes the album. The example I gave, kind of in the ska world, is "Worry" by Jeff Rosenstock. That is definitely a concept album because there's like the second half. It's a bunch of like 1 or 2 minute songs that all segue into each other. There's really no way that you could like rearrange the songs on that album. It would totally ruin like the impact of it. But at the same time, there are definitely albums where there is no necessarily coherent flow, or sometimes like even if the singles like or if the songs don't like segue into each other and the artist literally just like put the songs in whatever order, then there isn't necessarily a flow. Maybe sometimes we read into something that's not there.
Yeah, I didn't put this in the notes, but just thinking about the Jeff Rosenstock album, which I'm not a huge fan of his, but
I know, it's so sad to me.
No, it's fine. Like, I don't like strongly dislike him. It just doesn't, his music doesn't do it for me. But I listened to this album again, and it made me think of what you just said about it. Those shorter songs that are kind of clustered together made me think of Sonic Youth's album Daydream Nation. Towards the end,
Sonic Youth is the band I still need to get into.
Yeah, I mean, Daydream Nation is a good album for this conversation because there is a good flow and sequence to that album, and at the end it's kind of a similar thing. There's this like montage of songs that bleed into each other. The other thing that kind of popped into my head was Low by David Bowie, where the first side, I mean, this was released during the vinyl when most music was purchased on vinyl. So side A is these kind of poppy, rocky songs, and then side B are these kind of musical, instrumental, very different tracks.
You're right. Yeah.
You wouldn't want to shuffle that, and it seems like a deliberate decision by the artist. So
it's almost like spilling into a conversation about just like appreciating an album in general. Like, is an artist making a bunch of songs and just throwing them together, or are they making specifically an album? Like, are they curating an entire 40-minute listening experience that they want you to hear from front to back?
Well, it's definitely like some artists do, like the whole Adele thing with wanting to not be able to shuffle the album, like that. It was very important to her, right? Like, do you know about that?
Not specifically. It kind of only vaguely rings a bell.
So and I'm not an expert on this either, but I remember when the last Adele album came out, she said it was meant to be listened to in the sequence that she intended, and she actually had Spotify.
Oh, I'm seeing this now.
Disable the shuffle feature on the album. So
dang, that's crazy that she had. It's totally a side thing, but wow, she has so much power over to do such a thing. That is interesting. This kind of like spills into our second topic too, but like, when an artist releases music, or when any artist releases any kind of thing, of course they have kind of a message they're trying to send, and they're trying to like, express themselves in some way, but they can't really control how people consume that art. Like that's kind of not part of the deal, all things considered. And shuffling an album that an artist releases is a pretty small way to like listen to something in an unintended way. But I guess it definitely can at the end of the day, it's not something an artist can actually control.
No, definitely not. And there is a kind of a topic at the end of the discussion that relates to this that I'm going to get on a huge soapbox about, but I'll just say, as an artist myself, I've been in bands and we've put albums out. Like, I don't care if you listen to it in reverse or at 1.5 speed. Like, if you're listening to if you're consuming art that I created, that's an honor. Like, I don't care. I don't care what you're doing with it. And I don't care if you're using the CD as a coaster. Like, but
Wow, I think you're definitely more chill about it than a lot of other people.
Yeah, I think I get, and some artists put their heart and soul into creating art and putting it out in the world. And well, I do want to save some of that for the wrap up convo, because it's something that's kind of near and dear to me as both an artist and a consumer. But I will say, as far as shuffling, like, you have every right to shuffle an album, but it may not yield the best results, right? We actually, on my podcast, we talk about music, and we did a topic of 1-2 punches, which are songs on albums that are kind of inseparable from each other.
Oh, yeah, I like that. Wow.
Yeah, and some people would think 1-2 punch is track 1 and 2, but we kind of expanded it to any two songs that go together. And some of the examples are like, We Are the Champions and We Will Rock You. My biggest example is Maps into Y Control on the Yeah Yeah Yeahs, Fever to Tell. Like, I can't listen to Maps without listening to Y Control, like the way it fades into it. Like, so I rarely put those songs on playlists because I want to hear them together, if that makes sense. So I like what you put in the notes here is that shuffling albums is a terrible practice. And
I kind of backtracked it a little.
Okay. I'd like to hear about that. But I would just say the one thing that I came to by doing this is, if you take an album that doesn't have a very coherent flow in the first place and shuffle it, and the example I gave is Machine Girl.
I know that album, the one I didn't have to listen to, and that's your point is very interesting. I never thought of this before.
So that album is already kind of disorienting. So playing it on shuffle is actually kind of an interesting experience. So I would say it's something I haven't experimented with too much, but in general, I didn't enjoy the ones that I tried, if that makes sense.
It does. I think so far what we've covered, there's kind of like two buckets that you could throw albums in. There's albums that intentionally have a flow, that it's very obvious that there's an intentional flow, versus albums where it's just kind of a collection of songs and there's no intended flow. And that second bucket, it's more likely that you could experiment with just like listening to it on shuffle and maybe having a good time. The backtracking that I did is that I have this thing where I like listen to a bunch of albums every week, maybe like 30 or 50 albums a week. And I usually just go through all of them, like from front to back. Like, I'll start the album, I'll finish it, I'll start another one. One thing that I used to do was that I would just have like a playlist with all the albums and like shuffle through the whole thing. And my goal with that was that, like, sometimes if you start an album and you're like, oh, I'm not really that into this, then you kind of just like zone out and like the rest of the album flies by you and you just don't really pay attention. Whereas if you like maybe hear, a song like out of context or like, in a vacuum, you might be like, oh, this is kind of cool. Like, I wasn't, really paying attention the last time I heard this album, but hearing the song on its own is definitely a lot more enjoyable.
I'm so happy to hear you say this. What if I told you I do the same exact thing?
Oh, really? You still do that?
I have a playlist called Full Album Homework, that any albums I hear about, watching YouTube or listening to podcasts, somebody recommends an album, I'll throw it in that playlist. And every once in a while, I'll go in there and just hit shuffle. And I'm doing the same thing you're talking about. I just want to hear something that'll catch my ear, or I want to hear something that I know I won't like it right away. And a lot of times it works, I've caught some pretty good albums that way. And then, if you do the work, you go back and you can spin the whole album and see if you really like it, and you can discover some really good bands that way. So yeah, you're kind of right in that. I think if you do like a meta shuffle that you can find some You can find some gems that way. Because let's face it, like a lot of songs and a lot of albums have the banger openers, but a lot of them kind of ease you into the album. And sometimes, you're not going to get through even that first track.
Mm. Dang, you're making me reconsider this practice that I dropped a long time ago. I'm definitely have to take this one back with me.
It's a good way. Like, I can't tell you how many times I'm sitting watching YouTube and I just pick up my phone and, oh, that sounds really good, and just throw it in the Spotify playlist, because I'm not going to like pause the video and go listen to the album that some YouTuber is saying is the greatest album of all time. You know what I mean? Like, you need to somehow mentally bookmark it, or just have it for when you're in the mood to listen to music and see what sticks.
That isn't, yeah, dang. The problem is, like, I don't know how many albums I want to throw into this meta playlist that I'd want to, and then like listening through that whole thing would be like such a beast. Whereas if you're listening to an album, you can kind of just like, sit down for 30 minutes and listen to that. But I think it's definitely it becomes one of those situations, like, would Adele approve of such a practice? Like, we're technically not shuffling her album. We're kind of just making a playlist and shuffling that.
Yeah, and that goes to the larger question of like playlist culture versus album culture, and playlist algorithms and all this other stuff. But at the end of the day, there's only so many hours in a day. There's only so much time I want to devote to listening to new music. I do kind of pride myself on like, I think you and I listen to new music way more than the average person does.
Probably,
and
yeah. I mean, yeah,
there's
sure.
that saying that,
not to stroke our egos, but
no, but there's that saying that there's a few like platitudes that go around. One is that the music you love is the music that you heard during your formative years, like when you were a teenager. And then there's this other kind of nonsense idea that good music isn't being made nowadays, and they don't do it like they used to, and all this other nonsense. And it's like, there's great music being made every day. And it's only a little tiny bit of work to find it and to check it out. And it's not a point of pride. I mean, you shouldn't really be proud of the things you consume. I heard Finn McKenty, one of my favorite YouTubers, talking about this.
Oh my God, Alex loves that guy.
Yeah, I think he's rad, but he was just saying, like, consuming something is not something you should be proud of, which is true. But it's like having an open mind and having broad horizons is kind of something you can be a little bit proud of. Like, the willingness to experience new things is a good trait, I think. So yeah, don't. It's a good way to not be stuck in a rut and just, oh yeah, I only listen. When I was a teenager, I listened to two bands, Nirvana and the Smashing Pumpkins, and for years,
one of those bands doesn't even have that many albums.
Yeah, Nirvana, man. But I had all their singles. I had every B-side. I had all.
Dude, you gave me a lot of those. Yeah, man, you really had a lot of CDs by them.
Yeah, but yeah, I was so like stuck in a box. Like, I can't imagine being like that. Being like that now, I get very excited by hearing new things. But man, we are way off on a tangent here that has nothing truly to do with album sequence or flow.
I think, you're what you're saying about like being open-minded and consuming new music. That is great. That's what you and I are all about. I think an important part of that, you're right. It's like pretty much like not a lot of work to find cool new music. It's definitely something. If someone's like new to this whole world, it might be a little daunting. I think having an open mind in a lot of different ways is important. Like, where you're finding the music, what kind of sounds you're listening to, and even how you're consuming it, like, kind of goes into this discussion about like how you listen to the albums. Like, are you listening to the albums one by one in order? Are you like rearranging them in like your own playlist that you like? Or are you like shuffling them? There's different ways. I don't necessarily think one way is better than the other. And kind of going back to what you said in the beginning too, if you're listening to music and you're appreciating music, it's not really my place to like tell you, how to do that. Like, as long as you're doing that, that's great,
Amen.
In this discussion, well, the next thing we're going to talk about is skipping songs, but I actually want to go to the we can skip that for now, ironically, and go to the one about rearranging albums, because I think that ties in with like shuffling a little bit more.
Yeah, good idea.
This is I didn't listen to like the Doolittle and the London Calling playlist that you sent me, but they did definitely spark an interest in me. This is something I've been doing a little bit more recently, where I'm basically like making playlists like that, like in a much smaller scale. Like I'm not like rearranging the entire album, but sometimes if I'm listening to an album that I'm liking, you know, I'm like, oh, this is a cool album, I'm digging this, but like I think this song is a little bit out of place, or like I think, you know, there's like a few banger tracks in a row, but then this slow song kind of kills the vibe. I want to like, you know, move it to the end or something, or like rearrange it a little bit and kind of do my own thing. I've definitely like been getting more into that. Is that something that you've ever done?
It's not something I've ever done until now, and I got to tell you, in doing the research for this podcast, this is the thing that has me most excited. I really have never done this. I knew about the Doolittle thing, and I'm not an expert. I love this album. There's some kind of coded thing in the liner notes that reveals a alternate track sequence.
Wow, that's interesting. I've never.
And
heard
I kind of
this.
forget like what is the reason behind it? Like what is it supposed to sound like, kind of thing. Quite frankly, I don't like it. I made a playlist of it. I tried to listen to it. Doolittle has, Debaser as an opener is one of the greatest album openers of all time. So
Yeah,
to kind of
yeah.
change that, it just sets the whole thing off on a different path that I didn't really enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
However, I discovered that list of what I called fan edits. I don't know what else to call them, of classic albums that some guy did on Rate Your Music. And I noticed that he had an edit of London Calling, which I love The Clash and I love London Calling, but this is maybe an unpopular opinion, maybe a shitty take, but I think London Calling maybe didn't really need to be a double album. Maybe there's some filler in it.
I would go a little further, and honestly, I mean, I haven't listened to this album in a while, but I kind of think it's overrated.
I've always had this. I've always had this hatred of the song "Brand New Cadillac," which is the second song on the album. So you go from "London Calling," which is this
That's a good
banger
song. That's a
opening
good
track,
song.
and then it goes into "Brand New Cadillac," which is a
Just
song I
ruins it for
hate.
you.
And I made a playlist of this dude's fan edit of London Calling, and I probably listened to it like 10 times this week. It's just so good. It's every good song. The other thing is Train in Vain was kind of
that's a good song too.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, it was meant to be like not even on the album. It was thrown on at the last minute. It was kind of an afterthought. It became popular after the fact. And this playlist kind of sticks it right in the middle of the album, makes it feel more like part of the album and not this like afterthought that just got tacked on. And man, I just really love this idea. And I was thinking about, I want to try this with some albums that I think need it. And one of the examples, one of the questions I asked myself and I put in the notes here is, do longer albums suffer from not having, longer albums necessarily or more commonly suffer from not having a good flow or sequence by the nature of them being more lengthy? Like, is it easier to make a shorter album flow and whatever? And the example I thought of was Blur, which is a band I really, really love, but most of their albums are about 15 tracks and about an hour long. So I would love to, and I might do this, is make some fan edits of of some of the Blur albums, cutting out a few songs, making them a little shorter, giving them the treatment that this guy did with London Calling that came out so well. So go ahead.
That's dang. I didn't actually get to look at this list, but this is totally like its own like one. He's rearranging the albums, but two, he's
Yes,
also
that's
removing
another
some of the
thing.
tracks.
It's
Like
not just
you're
it's
you're
not just
getting quite
editing
liberal
songs
with
out.
the way the music is being packaged here. That's very interesting. I don't know if I would. It's an interesting idea for sure, but I feel kind of dirty just like removing half of an album.
Well, I had one thought on this as well. So on that list, that dude put a lot of Beatles albums, which I'm not, I'm not a huge fan of the Beatles, so I didn't like mess with any of that stuff. However, the Beatles and a lot of bands back then and even now, the album sequences and even what songs were on them were different depending on what region you were in.
Yeah, you're right. You're
And
right.
the Beatles are well known for this. Like when you talk about their albums, you have to talk about, is it the European release or the North American or American release? So in that sense, the sequencing wasn't so sacred. So I really have no, and man, like if I'm gonna spin London Calling, I'm skipping Brand New Cadillac anyway. Like why not just make the whole experience better, and rock out to it in a way that I really, really love, and just takes the album to a whole different level.
This is super interesting. Wow, you like took my idea and leveled it up. I'm gonna have to think about this one. Like, I think it's for the sake of the listener, it's very interesting because it becomes like your own thing that you're kind of involved in. You're breathing new life into the project.
Yeah.
You're like kind of like optimizing it to become the most enjoyable listen possible for yourself. But I still can't kind of like remove that feeling that I'm just like skipping half of an album. Like, I don't know. I feel kind of dirty doing that. Or like, I would have to like keep that in mind anytime I mention the album to anyone. Like, oh, I love that album, but I only love like half of it. Or I only love this specific curated version of the album.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. And when we talk about skipping tracks, there's albums of mine that I would call all-time favorites that there are literally songs that I never listen to because I skip them every single time I listen to the album. So I understand that. But on the other hand, like there are bands that I only like one of their songs or two of their songs. There are some bands that have albums that I only like half of the album. Like on my podcast, we were talking about, I forget what the topic was, but we were talking about Third Eye Blind's debut album, which I think is a classic, but I think it's so front loaded that I rarely listen to the whole thing because all the hits are on the A side. Like you can listen to the first, I don't know, 7 or 8 tracks. And we had a guest on the podcast who was like, no, the album's great front to back. And that's, that's a subjective opinion. For me, it's just like, no, I just listen to it until the hit parade is over and then I'm out. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for me, like there's kind of like two, if we're going to talk about skipping, there's kind of like two different types of songs that I would consider as like skippable songs. A lot of the time I find the examples that I listed were by clipping. I love clipping, but they have this problem where they include like 10, 20-minute songs in the end of their albums that are just like ambient noise. And I don't know why, that just really annoys me. It's almost like they're saying, hey, this is a song that we know you're going to skip because it's at the end. It's so easy for you to skip. It's also barely a song. It's also like doesn't sound anything like the rest of the album. Like it's there, but just skip it. And I'm just like, why would you do that? Like, why would you intentionally give us this song that you kind of don't, that we don't want? Whereas
I got, how dare you
No,
disrespect clipping so much?
Well, you get very what?
I said, how dare you disrespect
Dude, I love clipping, but I don't like that they do this. Like, it kind of like leaves a bad taste in my mouth to end the album like that.
So I'm going to tell you something. You may or may not believe me. Listeners may or may not believe me. But when I first listened to this album, I listened to Piano Burning the entire way through, and it really I found it to be very haunting, and I think it's there for a reason, and I think it's a good meditation on the destructive nature of just the decay of the fire and the strings popping and the wood crackling.
It's cool. It's interesting. I don't know. Like it's 18 minutes of, and they just set a piano on fire. They didn't even do anything.
it lets your imagination run wild.
That's an interesting way to think of it.
You can just feel it. You can relax to it. I think it's a jam. It's a bop.
Wow, calling
No,
piano burning a bop. Wow, you really are a Clipping fan. I mean,
it's literally
like
fire,
to me, it's just
bro.
kind of like a harmless skip. Like it's there, it's fine. I'm gonna skip it though, and it kind of like sours my taste of the album in the end.
All right, so obviously I'm being a little facetious. I did listen to the whole thing though the first time I listened to the album.
I did too.
And
And the same thing with the end of like maybe this is a me problem, but I can't just skip it. I have to like listen to it and then know that I want to skip it in the future.
Yeah. I have some examples of like all-time skips that come to my friend Frank, who I don't know if he's going to listen to this. I'm going to tell him to, but he introduced me to the band Taking Back Sunday back
I listened to that album.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. So here's a funny story with Taking Back Sundays, Tell All Your Friends, and this band called The Format.
I listened to that album too.
Very good. Okay, so my friend Frank, shout out to Frank, he introduced me to these albums back in the day when they came out. And Taking Back Sunday I would name them in my top 5 favorite bands like of all time.
Really? Wow, you really do like that pop punk.
Yeah, but they're great, and they're not just a pop punk band. Like, but there are songs on that album that I skip just because he's like, when he introduced me to these albums, he's like, "Oh yeah, this song sucks. Just skip it."
What?
And it like kind of.
How are you going to tell that when
head.
you're recommending a piece of music to someone? Just like make their opinion for them.
Exactly, dude. But here's the thing: it's stuck with me, and to this day, there are songs on both of those albums that I just skip. And when I listen to them, I was like, when I listen to them, I'm like, they're not that. It's true, they're not that good. And I don't know if it's because I don't have the nostalgia for them because of all these years of listening to the album. I didn't listen to these songs, and now to hear them, it's almost new to me. It's so funny. What did you think? Your first time hearing both of these albums, did you enjoy them? Now I'm just curious about, because in a way we were kind of recommending some new music to each other here for the show.
I only listened to both of them once, unfortunately, but I like the vibe. I didn't hear any, like, I didn't want to ask you, but like when I listened to both albums, I was like, why are these specifically here? Is there a song that's supposed to be like terrible that I should skip? I didn't really notice that either time.
That's cool. No, that's good. I just wanted to tell the story about how it got implanted in my brain that I must skip. Like I have literally been programmed and brainwashed by my friend to skip certain songs on these albums.
That's definitely part of music. Any media consumption for sure. But we always look at things with like nostalgia glasses. There's no way to avoid it.
Can we jump back to, because you talked about piano burning? I wanted to, because we're in the skipping topic now, right? So
yeah,
I want to talk about things that disrupt the flow of an album, which is a lot of times these are pet peeves of mine, and I wanted to get your take on it. Some examples are skits in mostly hip hop albums. There are skits in other genres, but I think hip hop albums, especially,
they kind of like created it, to be honest.
Some older stuff, yeah. For example, like Fugees, The Score, or Wu-Tang Clan, they have these skits that on CDs or when you're listening on Spotify are part of a song. And it not only does it disrupt the flow, but if you want to put, one of these songs, if they're not a separated track, which sometimes they are, like I think on Kanye's albums, it says like skit, whatever, is a track in and of its own. But like if you listen to The Score, there are certain tracks that are bangers, but you can't put them on a playlist because there's some dumb skit at the end of it. And also it, to me, kind of disrupts the flow. And now it seems like I'm picking on hip hop. I'm going to transition over to rock.
I'm not construing it that way, but I could see why you might feel that way on accident.
So rock artists do this as well. They put jams and noisy bullshit in their songs that are part of tracks. And 2 examples I can think of is Fugazi, their album Red Medicine. starts with this song called Do You Like Me, which is an amazing song, but it starts with about 30 seconds of nonsense bullshit in the beginning of it.
Oh, like feedback and like noise.
Yeah, it's
like
just
that
like kind of they're just like banging on something. It is musical. There's like a rhythm and a note to it, but it's purposely sounds like shit, and it's just noisy jamming, and then it breaks into the song. Another example is, what is it? Pavement, Shady Lane, which is
Dang, all these like old school rock bands that I haven't gotten into. My bad.
No, it's all good. A lot of people know this song. It's one of their like most well known and catchy songs. But the album version of this song just has like a jam session at the song actually fades out and then fades into a stupid jam session that has nothing to do with the song. So it's
That's
like,
interesting.
all right,
Yeah, I don't think I've heard of that before.
I'll give you even another example. The song, who is it? It's the Pete and Pete theme song.
Pete and Pete.
Oh, man. Sorry, I forgot what it's called. The band's called Polaris. Hey Sandy. I couldn't remember the name. I knew it was Hey something. So Polaris, Hey Sandy, if you want to throw that into a playlist or whatever, there's this annoying like montage of, I don't know, it's supposed to be like NASA people talking to each other on a radio, and it's like, just get to the music. I want to hear the song. I don't want to hear this nonsense. So this is something that in general is just kind of a pet peeve of mine, and I tried to think, and you may remember, man, on one of the albums that I was involved in, our Annoying Customer album.
Dude, I love Annoying Customer, man.
Oh, dude, thank you so much. There is a interlude, I guess you can call it, where I recorded myself running because
yeah, dude, I actually like that song.
Okay, so I gotta call myself out here because I did this on an album. I recorded myself running, kind of fading into and out of a song. So I'm not immune to it. I know that there have to be interludes and segues in between songs that can contribute to the flow, but a lot of them are just disruptive and take me out of it. So I've talked a lot about this because it's something I was kind of into, but what are your thoughts on those kind of things?
I would love to. It's interesting because you said you did it, and I actually like the way you did it. But I do think that there's a right way to do like skits and like add these kind of like ancillary, like extra things to your album, and there's a wrong way. And what you were saying, I mean, not to pick on hip hop again, but like they started skits. For a lot of different reasons, they made albums a lot longer because it was transitioning from vinyl to CD, so there's just like more space to work with. So they would make their albums pretty long, and they would add skits with like, voicemails or whatever, or like with Wu-Tang, they would add like, samples of like kung fu movies or whatever. And I definitely don't want to say the wrong thing. Like it's not lazy, but like, they're just kind of like adding things in that aren't musical. Like, and I'm wondering what like the intent is there. Is it to like, make a whole album experience that you're kind of like enwrapped in this world and you're kind of like getting some like behind the scenes like info and stuff like that, or like, I don't know. I'm truly like wondering what is like the end all be all for that kind of thing. Cause a lot of the time it doesn't really work out. You just kind of like end up skipping those songs and it's kind of just like whatever. But
yeah, and I would be willing to bet most people thoroughly enjoy this. Like, and we're in the minority here.
You could be right. Yeah, we could be wrong. We could just be wrong.
And something else funny just popped into my head. I don't know if you remember this movie called The Devil's Rejects. It was a Rob Zombie. It was a sequel to House of a Thousand Corpses.
No, I don't.
It doesn't matter if you don't remember it.
Movie?
Yeah, so the soundtrack to that movie I bought on CD because it had a really good soundtrack of all like Heartland
like Rob Zombie
rock
movie songs.
No, it was like Heartland rock from the 60s and 70s kind of stuff.
Cool.
Like, yeah, you would really like it. However, the thing about the CD was it had scenes from the movie, like the audio of scenes from the movie as tracks in between each song. So I gave this CD, I lent it to my friend Adam, and he put it on his iPod.
Wait, Adam
And
Kniper?
yeah,
Oh, wow. We blast from the past.
he put it on his iPod, and he came to me a couple weeks later, and he was like, "Dude, what the hell is that Devil's Rejects thing? Every once in a while, I'll put my iPod on shuffle, and some guy's like cursing out and killing somebody." And
That's
I'm
so
like,
funny.
"Oh man, that's like audio from the movie. That's so weird. Like, you should just delete those and keep the songs."
That's definitely one of those things where, that album is definitely not intended to shuffle.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I think I'm trying to think if there's any skits that I like.
There are. I have some examples for sure.
Okay, give me an example.
This is he's a bit of a taboo topic, so I'll skip over him. But Kanye's skits, I think, tend to be very funny, especially on College Dropout and Late Registration. Like those skits, those are just funny skits. Like they're just much better done than a lot of the other skits where it's just like a movie sample, like a cartoony sounding sample. Like it's genuinely just like a funny situation that's happening where he's like, in College Dropout, he's talking about like, oh, like my dad got so many degrees, like he went to college his whole life. That's what I want to do. Like I want to just keep going to college and getting to like just funny shit like that. And the other example would be Kendrick. I know you don't like Kendrick that much, but his skits are always really good. And he almost does it in a totally different way where like he's doing what you're describing, where like the skit is a part of the song, but it's so like you're like watching a movie, like you would not skip that part where like he's like, like talking with his friends about like, one of their friends just got shot and they're like, should we go back? Like, what should we do? Like, it's definitely not music, but like it just adds to the listening experience so much. Like he does it really well.
Okay, so I think, well, you kind of touched on something. I think you touched on two things here. So with Kanye, the College Dropout, which is one of my favorites, it's part of the theme of the album, and it's like tailor made to fit with that story.
Mm-hmm.
And with the Kendrick example, it seems like I'm not super familiar with it, but the way you're describing it sounds like it's more serious in tone and more like gripping and captivating. So I think maybe we're kind of honing in on what makes them kind of less enjoyable. Is the two examples you gave are, I think, a cut above what we're talking about, which is just kind of like, let's be silly and do random stuff and have almost like a Saturday Night Live sketch,
like a
about
commercial break or something.
Yeah, like yelling, like at on the Fugees album, like yelling at a Chinese food restaurant guy and doing the accents and everything. It's like, it's kind of low rent, and I think it's, I don't know, it's funny, it's good. Like that album is a classic, and if you're gonna sit and listen to the whole album, I don't know if I'd skip those parts, but in Wu-Tang I'll definitely skip a lot of them because they just seem to go on forever. But like I said, people love them, so but for me it kind of hurts the flow.
I think it's, I guess if you're gonna you're right. If you're gonna sit down and listen to an album like that, it's funny. I've never actually listened to the Fugees album, but I was just listening to Lauryn Hill before this call.
Nice.
You would want like the whole experience. It's like kind of like ingrained in the DNA of that album's experience. But when you kind of like go out of your way to take the album out of that context and like listen to individual songs or like put it on a playlist and shuffle it, you're kind of like, you're not desecrating the album, but you're like fundamentally changing the way the album was designed. It's almost like the album was a product and you're misusing the product. Of course you're going to run into issues.
Maybe.
Well, dang, dude, I think we've kind of covered all of the topics in this document. Did you say you had a rant you wanted to go on?
I will, but I actually wanted your take on something I touched upon a couple times and put in the notes. Are albums that are okay? I'll pose a hypothesis to you first. It is that my preferred album format, and I think the best album format or configuration or whatever word you want to use, is 10 tracks, 30 minutes long. I have found over the years that most of my favorite albums of all time are somewhere around that, approximately 10 tracks, approximately 30 minutes long.
Mm.
And it made me wonder, well, I kind of already mentioned it. I just want to dig a little bit deeper. Is it harder for a longer album to have better flow? And I've talked about Blur, how their albums are too long and could use an edit. But I gave the example of Passion Pit, which I think is a group, or I think it's one guy. I'm not even
They're pretty
sure.
popular.
Yeah.
I know some
their
songs.
albums are long. They're 15 tracks. They're approaching an hour long, some of them.
Mm.
But damn, if you can find a track you want to skip on a few of those albums, they're just really, really great. I'm not sure if there's like particularly sequence or flow being super important. It's just banger after banger. And well, I will say, like, on their one album whose name I'm forgetting, the one that has Sleepyhead on it, it does kind of, well, it has a bright flow throughout, but it gets kind of weirder as it gets towards the middle, and then more, I don't know. I haven't listened to it in a long time. Maybe this isn't the greatest example, but I want to know your your opinions. Can you think of albums that are super long? And it's funny, when I actually tweeted that, oh, the best albums are 10 tracks and 30 minutes long, and my podcast co-host Rich, he replied to that tweet, well, you just excluded every Pink Floyd album. And that actually made me think,
some of them are not that long. Well, like The Wall is pretty long.
That's the thing.
The Wall's a good album.
Pink Floyd is one of my favorite bands, and we've already talked about Dark Side, Wish You Were Here, Animals, and his tweet made me go look at those. And the interesting thing about Wish You Were Here and Animals in particular is that they are set up almost like EPs. They're 5 tracks or 5 or 6, and they roll for 45 minutes. But I would argue Wish You Were Here, like Animals is my favorite, but I've been listening to Wish You Were Here a lot lately. I'm not sure exactly why, but it's an album I like from my childhood, listening to my dad's records, and I've been kind of going back to it. It absolutely does not feel like it's 45 minutes long. It is set up like an EP, and it plays like one. So I was just wondering your thoughts. Like, are there any like particularly long albums that you can really get into the flow and like stick it out for the whole duration?
I'll say this. The thing you said about like 30 minutes and 10 songs, like it's almost like an inside joke. Like I see that's like the blueprint for a perfect album.
Okay.
But
is that an internet thing or like an inside joke with you? Or when you say inside joke, what do you mean?
I don't know. I don't know why I say that. It's just like everyone's like, oh, it's like, like a 30-minute album. Like it's going to be no fluff. It's going to be all banger. Like that's kind of like it's almost like the benchmark for if you didn't know what to do with an album, that's what you should aim for.
Okay.
So there's plenty of great examples for that. I actually really like if an artist creates an album that's like 30 minutes and it kind of sucks, or I'm just not that into it, I'm like, okay, whatever. But if an artist creates an album that's like an hour and I'm not that into it, I kind of respect it more in some ways. And I really respect it when there are like hour-long albums that I really like, or that like, I'm kind of like find really consistent. Like I would almost like give those albums like extra brownie points. Like, wow, I didn't think you would be able to like, keep me reeled in for this long, but you did. Specific examples, we're talking about Pink Floyd. The Wall is a pretty good example. I mean, it's not a perfect album, but it has a lot of great songs on it. I know you don't like Led Zeppelin as much, but Physical Graffiti, that's a double album that I really like. And this is very random, and I don't think you know this album, but the album that I'm thinking of was on my year-end list last year by Pierre Bourne, Life of Pierre 5. It's just kind of like a trap rap album, but it's just like I kind of appreciate that it's like an hour because I can just kind of like put it on, zone out. I kind of like vibe for like a whole hour. You know, if that album was the same quality but only a half hour, I would dislike it because like I kind of just like it just hits a certain vibe for me that like it's just kind of nice to have on for an entire hour.
That is awesome. I wish I had more albums like that. Maybe I've pigeonholed myself into this box of, ooh, this album's 30 minutes. It's going to be good. Or this album's too long. I'm not going to like it. I bet you I do that a lot.
Maybe, yeah. It's definitely I mean, I listen to a lot of music when I'm working, so it's easy for me to like just like blow through a lot of albums, and even if I'm not enjoying an album that much, it kind of just like, you know, I'm already working, so I'm not focused that hard. But it's kind of like conducive to like consume longer albums without like losing patience. Like if it's like or if, you know, if I'm like cooking or doing chores or something, but if I'm like trying to really dig into an album, like I know I want to like sit down for 30 minutes and listen to something good. That's kind of like where I'd be in a place where I might more easily lose my patience.
Yeah, that makes sense. What about, go ahead.
No, go ahead. What were you gonna ask me?
What about albums? Speaking of Pink Floyd, they do this with Wish You Were Here and with Animals, where they bookend the album with the same version of the same song, which I believe the technical term would be a reprise of the opening track. I gave a couple of other examples here: the Presidents of the United States of America, album 2, and also this Reviver album, their self-titled album. I don't know if you checked those out, but basically,
No, I didn't get to check those out. But I do have an example that I know you know. Now that you brought this up,
they do kick off with a cool opening track, and then they kind of end the album with a different version of the of that song. And the President's album, they open with "Good Evening, Ladies and Gentlemen," and then at the end of the album, it's "Goodbye, Ladies and Gentlemen." It's kind of like a like almost like you were at a concert or a show. I like that album is like that because it gives closure to the whole experience of listening to the album. And I don't have any specific examples because I'm not an expert on his music, but I know Prince does it. Prince does this somewhat. The album Musicology, which I listened to a lot when it came out, has kind of these musical themes. Like he uses different riffs in like multiple songs. So I think that kind of ties things together as well. It's different than just opening and closing with a book-ended like track that's the same thing. But I do find that a lot of bands don't do it very often. And I can't think of too many other examples. There was an indie band in Pennsylvania called OK Patty that I still really love them, but they're no longer a band. That they have this one album that they have this riff that they use in like 3 of the songs, and I thought that was really cool. Like if you have a good riff, like let it sneak into a different song, and it's like, oh yeah, that riff was really rad. I like how they're using it in this song. So stuff like that can also tie an album together. But what was the example of a bookended song that you think I would know?
So not exactly an opener and a closer, but Melodrama. Lord has the song Liability, and then she literally has the song Liability reprised later.
Right.
Like stuff like that, like what you're saying with like an intro and an outro, it definitely indicates to me that the artist has like, the bigger picture in mind. They have the album in mind, which I always respect. Yeah. It's almost independent of album flow though, because like if you have like an opening track and a closing track and they reference each other, but that's it. Well, you could kind of put any album in between those 2 tracks and still kind of like accomplish the same thing, right? So
it depends on I see what you're saying, but it depends on the album. I think take Animals for example. I mean that's it's almost unfair to compare other albums to that album. It's true. Like again, Pink Floyd is kind of for me at least, they're a cut above anything. Definitely one of my favorites, and the only boomer shit I am willing to listen to. But yeah, like you couldn't. I think it's just beautiful how Roger Waters uses "Pigs on the Wing" to kind of hug all the content in that album.
It's great. Like obviously the three like Dogs, Pigs, and Sheep, those songs are like great. Those are the songs that I want to listen to.
Yeah.
But like the way that they use like, you know, Pigs on the Wing, like the intro and the outro, like it's not like a skit, kind of like it's in a weird territory where like those are obviously like, you know, not like those are like appetizers for like the main course of the album. But like,
Yeah, that's
God,
good.
never in a million years would I skip those songs. Like, you know, those songs are like crucial to the Animals experience.
Absolutely. And I think you got my mind churning. I like the appetizer idea. And then as you were saying that, I was thinking like, wow, Pigs on the Wing Part 2 is almost like a signal, like it's okay to just like get a glass of water and take a deep breath. This that you know the album's coming to a close, kind of thing. Like, I love it. It's emotionally signaling to you that the album is coming to a close. And I mean, it'd be weird if it like picked up again and went into another song. Like, but yeah, it's a beautiful.
It's similar with Dark Side of the Moon, which we talked about earlier. Like that has a, because it's a lot more songs. There's kind of evident that there's like a much more intended flow. Whereas with, you know, Animals, it's just like 5 songs. It's kind of like it is what it is. But with, you know, Dark Side of the Moon, there's like an intro. The outro is like super epic. Like it definitely kind of like takes you on this journey, you know. And yeah, like to have a song that kind of like just kind of like sends you off is definitely a good note to end on.
Yeah, and the same thing with, not the same thing, but the other example, and I talked about maps and Y control, but Fever to Tell, and I tried so hard to find this quote from Karen O that she said, you know, Fever to Tell is not a concept album, but the emotional flow of the album is supposed to represent a night on the town, just frolicking.
That makes it a concept album in my mind.
I guess so. It's a very like high concept, like, but when you look at it that way, it's interesting because it kicks off rockin', it has emotional highs and lows, and it definitely ends on kind of a somber note. So I've always found that a very good album to be made, to be enhanced even a little bit more just by that thought. So, and I wonder if there's. I'm looking at the notes. What else did we miss? We didn't talk about King Gizzard, dude. Nonagon.
Oh, we didn't. That's also a very. I just actually saw them like on Friday too.
Oh, that's awesome.
They didn't play any songs from this album because they have like 20 albums, but that's a creative, you know, that's a really creative like use of flow, and also like this would be a whole nother conversation, but like the way that technology has changed for artists to like be able to create music, like you keep talking about "Wish You Were Here." There's what's that song like "Diamonds in the Sky" or something?
Shine On You Crazy Diamond?
Shine On You Crazy Diamond, yeah. It's split into 2 parts. Like,
yeah.
Like, would they have done that if they released the album today, you know, on streaming, where you don't have 2 sides of a record, you know, like they kind of were forced to do that, maybe?
You know, I have to mention, just because I'm such a nerd, Wish You Were Here is like the inverse of Animals. It has these very long opening and closing tracks with the 3 or 4 shorter songs in the middle, where Animals is the short songs at the end and the big long songs in the middle. Anyway, sorry, I had to say that.
That is
yeah, there's definitely like, well, we know it's known that like I mentioned this before, like TikTok and Spotify playlist algorithms, like songs don't even have bridges anymore. Songs start with the hook now, because you gotta get it right into the hook, whatever it is, whatever the catchy part of the song is, starts the song a lot. And the reason for that is so you can get on a playlist, or so that your song will be used on TikTok. A lot of people complain a lot about this. I'm not like particularly, you know, I don't think the sky is falling because this is going on, but, you know, a lot of people are very concerned by that. And yeah, no way. Well, I don't know, you know, I don't know what Roger Waters would do if he was coming up as an artist during the days of TikTok. Who knows? But yeah, it's interesting because, you know, and I got to admit, any playlist that I've ever made in my life, I'm not going to put Shine On You Crazy Diamond on it or any particularly long song. Like, and that's, I'm trying to think if I've ever listened to like a generated playlist that had a super long song. Probably not. So yeah, I wonder if it's a consideration for someone like King Gizzard. You know, they're not some TikTok pop artist, which there's nothing wrong with TikTok pop artists, but I wonder how much King Gizzard music gets into Spotify algorithm playlists or TikTok videos.
I don't know, but you know, the opportunity to have their album on streaming and like, you know, you can start with any song. Like you can't fucking do that with a vinyl. You know, you have to like listen to it front to back, or even with a CD. Like you can't really do that. So you know, it's just kind of a very creative way that they played with the album flow. It's not something I've ever heard someone else do before, where they have all the songs segue into each other and the last song segues into the first. So
yeah, it's pretty cool. I'm sure they're out there. I'm sure there are plenty of examples. I don't know any. The one thing I can think of, and this is kind of a funny, stupid example, but Girl Talk, which is the mashup artist who makes...
Wait, who?
Girl Talk?
Girl Talk.
Yeah, I showed it to you once a long time ago. It's just mashups. It's kind of like
that's interesting.
You know, it's the vocals from one song over the music from another song, kind of mixed together. And he made back in the 2000s, like he made a bunch of albums of this kind of stuff, and a few of the albums loop on each other. Like there's a part with Andre 3000 in his album Feed the Animals, where it's Andre 3000, and the album starts with him saying play your part, and then at the very end of the album he goes play your part, and the beat syncs up and it matches if you loop the album. So
that is interesting. Yeah, I'm sure it's done before with I guess with King Giz, they kind of like made it the gimmick of the album. They kind of like made it like not the main selling point, but like
I thought it was pretty cool. Like I'm not a fan of their music, but I did listen to the first song and then the last song and then into the first song again. Listening to the
it's very cool the way they do it. So yeah, I mean, I definitely appreciate that artists. This is also a conversation about like albums and like playlists and singles. You know, what's more important. Artists are kind of like forced to do one thing in order to survive, but if artists are still trying to like curate album experiences, that's what makes me happy.
Sounds good. Well, that would bring me, you want to wrap it up with this final bullet point here, because that's the soapbox I'm going to get on.
Oh, the final, is it more important to hear to an artist's intended album flow, or should we as the listener prioritize our enjoyment of the album?
Yes.
All right, so lay it on me.
I feel super strongly about this. The album, and this goes for anything. This goes for books, it goes for video games, movies, whatever it is. The album is there to please me. Think about that. The album is there to please me. The movie is there to please me. The book is there to please me. What I mean by that is, if you want to read a book where you ripped out every third page and then started reading the book, you can do that if that's what you like and how you want to read it. If you want to play a video game with cheat codes, you can do that if that's how you want to do it. If you want to watch a movie with a Snapchat filter over it, you can do that. To hell with what the artist thinks. This is so important to me. I don't give a rat's ass what Adele thinks about how her album should be sequenced. I don't care if Fugazi thinks that part at the beginning of Red Medicine was really, really cool. I just, I'm the end consumer, and I consume the product as I see fit. I give some regard, if it's an artist I really like, again, I'm not going to, it's my choice and right to listen to this shit however I want. So the question, and I did a TikTok about this where it was a book guy, and he said, should we as readers DNF books, which means did not finish? And he's like, I don't think we should. And I stitched this and I said, bro, you don't owe the author anything. If you don't like the book, put that shit down. You're going to waste 20 hours of your life with it. And the same thing applies to albums. Like, if you don't like a song, for the love of God, skip it. You know what I mean? Like, and again, as an artist who's released music, listen to my music out of sequence, listen to it backwards, listen to it with the bass turned way up and blowing out your speakers. I don't care. Like, thanks for buying the album. So
wow.
That's my soapbox.
That is very interesting. That is, I totally see what you're getting. Yeah. There's maybe a part of me that wants to be a little too righteous, or like or like higher, holier than thou, where it's like, well, that's a little hedonistic. Like, shouldn't you exercise some patience and like listen to things as they're intended? But I don't know. Like, I mean, we're almost into a territory where if an artist releases creates art and they can't control how an audience consumes it, it's like a totally different thing is that like you can't consume how someone feels about it, or like you can't consume like the message, or you can't like change the way that they like communicate with it, or like what message they might pull from it. Like, that's totally out of your hands. So when you kind of put it in a realm of like, oh, you know, they can enjoy it however they want. Yeah, I'm not going to argue with that.
And I'll even use an example that is kind of touchy. And you'll remember when Black Dresses pulled all their music off the internet because they didn't like how it was being used. Like, sorry, like I respect them a lot. I love that group and I love their music, but if you put it out in the world, it's a big bad world, and people are gonna do. Yeah, they're gonna do what they
but like
do.
You know, they don't deserve. I thought they took it off because like they were like getting harassed or something, not necessarily because of the music.
Oh, okay. If that's true, then that's fucked. I thought it was because they just didn't like their music being used on TikTok. Maybe I'm talking out of turn, and I don't remember it quite exactly as it happened. So if that's the case, then
it could have been a combination of a lot of things. But you know, like it's tough. You know, artists are humans, of course. You know, that's something that we definitely shouldn't forget. That's why when you're saying like, oh, like rearrange an album, you know, oh, play a game with cheat codes, that's fine. Like, this is far worse things that as fans we could be doing to artists.
Yeah, and I mean, like, I'm just thinking again, I'm a big reader, and sometimes I'll read a book and, oh, that chapter was really good, or that paragraph was really good. I'm going to read it again. No, the author intended you to read this book straight through.
Or he didn't, what if they like copy and pasted the same paragraph again to give you an excuse to read it twice or something?
Or like, oh, the author, he or she didn't intend for you to flag the pages and make notes and highlights. It's meant to be a reading experience where you read it straight through and don't take breaks or, you know, reread sections or whatever. It's like there's no such thing. There's no such thing. So,
dang, you've definitely given me a lot to think about with the. I think we both agree that the most exciting part is being able to like rearrange albums and make our own playlists.
Yeah, and I want you to kind of I want you and the listeners to understand that. Again, I don't want to use I'll use a different example. Kendrick Lamar doesn't care, Andre, how you listen to his album.
Yeah, he definitely doesn't care.
You know what I mean? Like. Or he shouldn't, or he has no right to, is what I'm really trying to say.
That makes sense. That makes sense for sure. Although, you know, that's a bad example because I would never rearrange any of his albums. They're perfect.
That's funny. Well, what was your thought before I went on the soapbox? Like you were the one who put this question into the notes, so.
You know, I don't know if I have a closing thought. I think album sequencing is something that we should be cognizant of for sure. I think we should, you know, I think at the very least you should probably listen to like if you're gonna listen to an album, you should at least listen to it the whole way through once, like before you start like skipping songs willy nilly and like rearranging it and putting all your favorite songs on. I think the ability to kind of like have the patience to listen to something even if you don't like it the first time, or you don't initially like it, and kind of like dig a little bit deeper and like and like think critically of it is a very important thing. I'm all for like enjoying, music and getting the most out of the things that you enjoy, but I definitely enjoy like challenging myself as well. I don't want to. Maybe this is just like a me thing, and like the example you said about DNFing books is interesting, because I'm never too quick to like give up on an album. Like I usually want to listen to an album even if I know I don't like it a few times, just to like really give it like an honest chance. And I feel like if I were to like go the way of just like, oh, like, just skip the things you don't like I don't know, that would totally change my perspective on music listening.
That's fair. That's fair. Just remember, life is short. There's only so many hours in the day, and the time you spend listening to music you don't like is time that you could spend listening or discovering music that you will love.
I'm okay with that, because even if I did change my strategy to do what you're saying, I would still not get to all the music that I want to get to. So it's fine either way.
Yeah. Well, that was awesome.
Dude, thank you so much for joining me. So you are Shawn Gray. Where can people find you? I'll have links in the description and stuff. But what do you want to promote the most?
Very cool. Well, yeah. Thanks for having me. This was awesome. You and I have been friends forever. We always nerd out on media, so it was
Yeah,
awesome
hell
to
yeah,
have this
man.
kind of conversation that we've always had since we've been friends. But to put it on the record like this and kind of extract our thoughts and chew on things for a little while together was pretty awesome.
Yeah, man, it was great having you.
People can find me. I would love people to check out my TikTok, which is at Shawn_Gray_. So it's SHAWN_GRAY_. And I recommend that because that's just where I play music. I do video game stuff. I play a lot of Earth Defense Force. I've been posting a lot of Xenoblade 3 on there.
You have.
I don't want to say it's like, oh, it's so random, but it's literally just all the stuff I'm interested in, including a lot of music stuff. I do album countdowns and different topics of music that I think go I do a pretty good job on them, if I do say so myself. The other thing is I am part of a podcast called the Press Playcast, which is it started out as a video game podcast, but we actually rebranded to the Press Playcast recently because we talk about music so much. And a lot of people came to the podcast for video game talk, and they're like, huh, you guys really talk about music a lot, don't you? So we actually rebranded to the Press Playcast. So that's
a good problem to have.
Oh yeah, and we still talk about video games. We talk about movies. It's more of a catch-all for pop culture and all kinds of media now, but a lot of music stuff. So I would recommend, if people like your show, Andre, they like Disc Junkie, please check out the Press Playcast at pressplaycast.com. It's everywhere except Spotify. I'm sorry if you only listen to podcasts on Spotify, you're not going to be able to catch us. But on Twitter, we have a Twitter account too. That's at RFG Playcast, which that was the old name of the Playcast, but that's my Twitter handle. So yeah, those are my plugs. Appreciate that.
All right, awesome. And I'm going to share links to all that. But dude, thank you so much for taking the time. We can definitely do this again. It's definitely good to just have these chill conversations, hear your thoughts on stuff. I mean, we have been friends for a while, and you've been listening to music and consuming media longer than me. So I'm always interested to hear, your thoughts on things and your takes on things. You should reconnect in general.
Hell yeah.
All right, awesome, man. Well, thanks so much for tuning in, guys.